What is up, everybody? Joined here today by Mr. Adam Maxwell. Excuse me, Grand Master.
Oh, wow.
Mr. Adam Maxwell.
Oh, wow. Just Adam. Just Adam will do.
Okay, we'll go Adam from here on out. Going to talk about something that I think is really cool. Something that maybe goes somewhat overlooked. You can tell me that, at least overlooked by some people. Executing a fast and efficient mag changes.
There's definitely a lot of opinions about it.
Okay. What would be some of those opinions?
Well, it's kind of one of those things that a lot of people think, well, yeah, I'll just do what works for me. But as you whittle it down and really think about it, like everybody kind of ends up in the same place because
With the same methodology, you mean?
similar anyway. Because the end state is with the magazine going in here. Like, so everything you do, every millimeter you get away from this position adds time. So it's just a matter of how fast do you want to go, how important it is, and what other caveats are there behind doing your fast reload. You know, are you doing it in a competitive environment where it's essentially a scored skill? Is it a
because the longer it takes you to do it, it's going to cost you time?
It's engineered into the game. So they set, in USPSA and the other action sports, they essentially make the course long enough that you don't have enough bullets. So you have to execute a magazine change at some point, and that gets into strategy of the game. So where are you going to do that? Is it more advantageous to do it one place versus another? Maybe try to get 2 in instead of 1. That kind of stuff. So it is a piece of the strategy in the action shooting sports. As you transition more into the application of practical tactical defense, well, now we're talking essentially a worst case scenario or an emergency recovery. You've had stimulus to shoot your gun empty of ammunition. Now you need more. So it gets into be a time is life kind of thing.
Or possibly you have some sort of malfunction, I
Some
guess.
type of malfunction. The most popular malfunction would be your button getting pushed while it's in the holster.
Nobody likes that.
So especially, it's easy to show because I've got my southpaw holsters here. But if something pushes your button, the magazine comes out. So that would be bang click right off the get go.
You don't want anybody pressing your buttons.
It's not recommended.
I will mention, and I thought this was really cool, Adam. So these mags are loaded with inert ammo. You said to simulate, the weight of a loaded magazine.
Yep. Everything about these cartridges is real. Those are real bullets, real brass. The only thing they don't have is powder and a primer. But they have the 2 heaviest components of a piece of ammunition or a round of ammunition, so I can get the sensation of a loaded magazine, a fully loaded magazine, both in weight. So I'm used to that amount of weight being what I'm manipulating. It feels a bit more solid than an empty magazine does. Like, you can absolutely feel the difference. And then it has the same amount of resistance when I actually try to seat the thing. A full magazine is under a lot of spring pressure, depending what weapon system you're talking about. So it takes the same amount of oomph to get it to click, and that's what you're practicing. Whereas if you practice on empty magazines, sometimes you get really used to seating them, but you don't have to press them as hard or as completely to get them to seat. And then all of a sudden, if you transition and do it on a live magazine, the reps you have in practice aren't a full seat. So then you self-induce more malfunctions that way too.
What about even just how gravity affects the weight of that magazine when you're dropping a mag? Let's say if you're in the middle of a match, or like you said, you're in some sort of tactical defensive scenario. I mean, I imagine that is happening in a more realistic way as well. Yeah.
Yep. That's absolutely a thing. The empty magazines fall out. Like if you're doing at an intermediate or advanced level, the empty magazines absolutely fall out slower than loaded magazines. Now we're talking 1/10, 2/10 of a second, but we're playing a game where that kind of stuff matters. So if you're in a scenario, some of the situations you can find yourself in the game, they're setting you up essentially for an artificial reload. Some folks at the entry level, they'll be like, okay, well, I only need 6 shots, so I'm going to put 6 shots in here. So I'll have an empty magazine. Well, you'll have an empty magazine so it won't fall out all the way. So sometimes even though you know you only need 6 shots, you leave a full magazine in there because you have to wait for it to drop out.
Gotcha.
It'll drop out faster so that it'll clear the mag well, so you have room to get in there. If you search around on the YouTubes long enough, you can actually find there's some fairly famous videos of guys where the mags actually crash in the air. So they'll be dropping one out and they'll come up and the magazine won't be out in time. They'll be trying to stuff another one in before the other one comes out.
Interesting. One thing I notice, whether it's the guys down at Edge, when you are facilitating something like this, or whether it's the shooting component or whatever, you guys are really good at removing the unnecessary. Like you take away everything that doesn't need to be there, and it creates just like a high level of efficiency. You've got a competition belt on the table here. You've got one on.
Yep.
And then you have your an EDC holster here. Because you have the competition belt on, if you can, maybe talk through and maybe it's the same, Adam, what it looks like, your step-by-step process for facilitating that mag change.
Okay. Those steps are fairly uncreative. So you'll have the gun out and doing some kind of shooting, right? Bang, bang, bang. And then from here, you have to both get the magazine out of the gun and get to the new magazine. So some combination of your support hand has to come and start grabbing the other magazine. That buys you time. You can simultaneously push the button with your fire control hand so that a mag would start coming out. And then you're retrieving it from wherever you have it, orientating the bullets so that they're oriented towards the chamber, sticking it in, and then giving it a full seat. If you shot the gun empty, then you would also have to cycle the slide to put one in the chamber. But it's just a matter of mag. You got to get the one that's in the gun out, so pushing that button, bringing the other one up, putting it in, and then doing that in a seamless fashion. And kind of somewhat how the primitive part of our brain works is if you do something enough, it won't allow you to be inefficient. You will find the most efficient way to do anything that you do repetitively enough. And so that's how I say a lot of people find themselves doing very similar things eventually, even though they kind of go the different routes to do it. A version of that would be, you start off and people are like, well, put your stuff on your belt and put it however you want. Everybody likes it a little bit different. A lot of new guys, they'll start with the bullets backwards. So the bullets will be facing towards the rear or facing uprange. And so in their mind, they're thinking, I'm going to pull this thing out and stick it in there. But when you have the bullets backwards, you also have to roll this magazine around somewhere. So there's no efficient way to do it. I mean, you could find an efficient way to do that, but all of it is less efficient than the bullets pointed at the gun already. So you just have to pick it up and stick it in. So some of the universal stuff that people find is bullets are going to be facing forward towards your center line, even as they go around behind you, or they start facing straight out. And that kind of transitions into the second thing is you want it on your belt somewhere so that you don't have to put your hand in an unnatural position to grab it.
Gotcha.
So the closest you could get to your hand just falling on it and picking it up is more efficient. Whereas that's why I like my pouches in the back here. As they get back, they start to rock. They start to angle a little bit more horizontal because that's the way my arm works.
Sure.
So if they were pointed straight up and down, I would also have to break my wrist and pull it straight out, which is a direction my shoulder doesn't really want to go, where I'm more putting them in line with the direction that my shoulder naturally wants to go so that it comes out.
It's definitely, I can even just by watching you there, I can see that's a more natural movement.
Yep. But this competition rigs are specifically set up to facilitate fast reloads. Like that is your only purpose in life is shooting a pistol fast and effectively. When you're using a rig like this, when you use a rig, if it's part of your job or your other life function, having extra magazines might be a thing that you do. But you might, if we think in terms of a military application, a soldier would have to carry ammunition and first aid gear and potentially radio equipment and potentially signaling equipment and you don't just get to set your belt up for fast reloads. Right. So that's some of the stuff where it's like, those people have a need to do fast reloads, but it's not the only thing they're doing. So that's kind of, as you add in redundancy or as you add in asterisk steps, your reload is going to get slower. The fastest a reload can be is, this magnet pouch right here on your center line. And it's basically a magnet holding it on and a couple of ribs to hold it straight. That is on the clock. That is the fastest it could be. And if we could get it closer to our chest, or closer to the gun, like if it could be mounted on a vest or something, you could probably get it faster. The only reason people don't do that is because it's against the rules in the sport.
Gotcha.
So the sport says it has to be mounted on your belt. So mounting it on your belt, that is as fast as it gets. But this is not a stable platform for a magazine to live in. Like, you couldn't just EDC like this. I don't even really go around at the match like this because just walking around, it'll fall off. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of, I load the gun and then I load that mag pouch.
And that's why it's the first to go, too.
Yep, that's the first one to go. And then the rest of them are conventional style slot pouches, so to speak, because they're holding on to it more firmly. I may or may not need those, but they'll be there when I need them. But as you add in caveats like that, or like concealment. Well, do I have to conceal this magazine? Okay, well, that one of the reasons that a competition rig is faster is because I have room to get my hand behind it. This thing, the pouch itself is offset maybe half inch or an inch from the belt line.
Sure.
So I have room to get behind it and grab it. It's not tight up against my body. This magazine pouch wouldn't conceal at all. But if you have an appendix rig, whereas now it's in a good spot, but you also have to dig for it a little more to get it. And that time that you're digging, that's a tenth, 2/10 of a second, depending on your level of proficiency with it.
What does that look like? How does that differ for you in any other ways when you're drawn from that appendix, kind of transitioning from the competition side to the concealed carry side? I mean, is it all those same fundamentals, just a little bit different, and that's what you just mentioned? That's the difference?
I would say, especially with the appendix rigs that are out now, like when I first started carrying, I don't think the ergonomics were there. It was definitely in vogue in that time to be like at point of hip or behind or in a pocket. Mm-hmm. Whereas as the newer era of appendix rigs, people have been carrying appendix forever, but the sidecar style of appendix rig, the Incog, and who else? The Tier 1, all those companies that have popularized this style, they have also by default put the magazine in a pretty similar place to where I'm used to grabbing it. So the orientation's a little bit different, but if I were to go for a reload, my hand would come to this area and I would find a magazine.
Right.
And it's canted a little bit. It's not canted as much as a competition rig, but it's canted a little bit so that it's ergonomic to grab. So if you're going to carry a magazine like this, a consideration is somewhere that you could grab it. And then at its core, I think the fundamental of practicing in the competition environment, the primitive skill on it is your hand is coming towards your belt line and your center line, and then I start sweeping around. So I grab the first magazine that I find, and then I grab this next magazine that I find. It always comes to the center line and works its way around until it finds one. And so if your carry rig is set up that same way, that it comes to the center line and it goes around the clock until it finds one, that's a recipe for success. Now that would be where you'd have to practice two different things. Is if I didn't carry this on my belt line, if my spare magazine was in my pocket, now I have a completely different thing to practice and try to fish it out of there. So you can put it other places and it will be more concealed, but you have to dig harder to find it, and it might be a different skill set that you have to practice.
Is this what you've settled on though?
I don't settle on any one thing. I say currently this is probably what I use the most. being an enthusiast, I carry a variety of things, but a lot of the rigs that I wear currently are very, very similar to this appendix. And then because now they've made it kind of ergonomic to have another magazine there, I do that. I don't necessarily need a magazine in concealed carry, but I do carry one fairly often. Or like I was saying, I actually have a setup like this, but I have the rifle mag pouch on there because I'm in we're teaching classes and stuff or at shows and whatnot. There are rifles around. They're not necessarily loaded, but if you had a magazine, you could load one. So started playing around with those types of setups too.
Interesting. So it'd be, or am I understanding this right? It's holding your pistol.
Yeah. So but
you have a rifle mag.
Yeah. So I have a truck gun in the back seat.
Okay.
That's not necessarily loaded, but if I had a magazine handy, I could load it.
Okay. Gotcha.
If you see a coyote, here's my, and you could take care of that kind of thing. But not necessarily leaving loaded rifles around everywhere.
Okay, sure. All right, that makes a lot of sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Especially in some places it's not legal. They have varying levels of, it has to be cased, or it doesn't have to be cased, but it can't be loaded or whatnot. But if you have a magazine handy, then you can load it pretty quickly. So,
it seems simple in some ways, and you guys definitely make it look simple.
Mm-hmm.
And then I try to do it, and I'm like,
Well, part of that is thousands and thousands of reps, a week, a month, a year, 4 years. But I think some big initial steps are having an eye towards the initial efficiency. So putting the magazine in a place that's ergonomic to grab, and trying not to overthink that. A straight open hand, like this is how you grab things, right? So how best can I put a magazine so that I can just grab it like this? And a lot of folks will say, well, I can just turn my wrist like this, and it'll be, as soon as you say "and"
right
into something, you're making it more inefficient. So I think that's the main efficiency part of all this, because there's lots of products. This is kind of hard to articulate, but there's lots of products, especially in the competitive world, where they're infinitely adjustable. This one, you can roll it almost 180 degrees, horizontally and vertically. And so when you give folks all these options, they kind of all arrive at these weird conclusions as to what is the best, fastest way to put it. And so when you're trying to figure out how to place it or how to adjust something that's infinitely adjustable, you have to come at it with the standpoint of how do I put it so my hand just falls on it? What angle does it have to be so that my hand just falls on it and I can pull it straight? And not necessarily straight in like a carpenter's term of like level and 90 degrees, like straight in terms of how your arm moves.
Right.
How your shoulder moves, because everything your body does is somewhat on an angle.
Right.
So what angle does it need to be at so that you can pull it straight out without having to cock your wrist or bend your shoulder and things like that?
I mean, when you're built, you said some things there that I think at least really rang true or like made a lot of sense to me. As you're self-analyzing, remove the "and." Like, well, I mean, that's as
soon as you drop an "and," you just identified somewhere you can be more efficient.
And then when something feels awkward, right? Like it's pretty, like even just when you're like, yeah, my arm doesn't, yeah, like that's hard, but this is easy. So like just going with the natural, like analyzing your body and the way it naturally wants to move is going to, help you create those efficiencies.
Yep. The same thing like with the holsters too. Like we'll notice like a lot of the holsters, they're actually dropped. They're a little bit lower than the belt line.
Sure.
If we're just going for speed, well, that's because that gives our shoulder more room to pull it from. The higher it sits on our body, the less like range of motion we have to pull it out.
Well, and that's a more natural spot for your hand to start out.
Like ideally your hand would just fall on it. This one could even be a little bit lower. Your hand would just fall on it and you could start pulling it out. So I think the biggest key is putting it in a place where you can grab it most efficiently, and then pretty much the further you get it away from the gun, that's more time it's going to take.
The further the magazine is from.
Yep.
What about this? Maybe to finish, walk us through, because I feel like there's some things, well, you tell me, but there's some things that you do just by like feel and know, like you just know and practice. But are there things that you like visually do at the same time? Like, are there some things that you don't look at and some things you're like, no, like I'm going to watch the magazine go in. Like that's part of my process.
Yeah. Yep. And especially as you're learning it, it's kind of that's a good question. So this is one of those things where, like, have you ever pointed at something and missed, like across the room? Have you ever pointed at something and missed?
I mean, not really.
Not really, right?
Yeah.
So your brain knows how to bring your index finger or your fingers towards what you're looking at. So the hand position, ultimately, when you're delivering the magazine to the gun is a point.
Okay.
So if you're not familiar with arriving here, a big initial key is to visually index the magazine well to see it, so that you are bringing your hand towards what you're looking at. The seeing the mag well on the bottom is kind of the biggest visual cue of the whole thing, and that would be the hardest part to learn, because, like, especially some of the tactical world, they're trying to teach people to learn like this. That was more in the 90s, but
so 90s.
So they're
Mauve is back, by the way.
Is it?
Yeah, I think so.
It was time. So they're rolling the gun just a little bit, so that one, again, they're presenting the magazine well to the angle that you're bringing the magazine to, right? So they're rolling the gun just enough so that they can kind of meet in the middle on that, but that also gives you something visually to look at. If you look at the magazine well on the bottom, and sometimes guys will add color to this.
Oh, interesting.
A bright fluorescent color. I think some of the edge guys even do this. They'll like paint on it with markers or white out or something like that.
Okay.
They give this some kind of contrasty color. So on a black gun, that catches your eye, so that they have something to look at, because they're trying to pair these two things together. Or on some guns, they'll sell the insert. The insert itself will be white. If you go to matches and you see people with white magazine wells, that's why they're giving it a really bright color, so that their eye catches it when they roll it over and look. As soon as you kind of get the magazine this far, you don't have to look at it anymore, because it's trapped. So vision technique wise, you're at the target until you start to do the reload. On the reload, you're looking at the magazine well until you get the magazine kind of past the point of no return, and then you start to look back at the target again while you finish it.
Okay.
So if you were to break it down into the pieces, that you have to learn, because a lot of people try to learn it all at once. I think when people are trying to work on fast reloads, they're trying to do the whole thing, and they're trying to do reps on the whole thing. The pieces you have to learn are the grab of the mag. So it's kind of like a draw on the pistol. You have to learn how to draw the magazine consistently, and that's a matter of your hand knowing where it is and your hand landing the same way on it every time. And so, like, the key here is mainly the bottom of the magazine is in kind of the crotch of the palm of my hand.
Okay.
Because that's what ultimately pushes on it.
Okay, sure.
So it lands in your hand the same way. So you pull it out of the magazine, or you pull it out of the pouch, and it's in your hand the same way. You kind of have your index finger in a pointy configuration that helps you guide it to the gun. So hand to the pouch is 1, pouch to the gun is 2, the seat is 3, and then it's reloaded and you're going back to the target.
When I watch you do that whole process, though, it looks very mechanized, but in a really good way.
Yeah.
Like, I'm seeing all these things come together, and I can see the efficiency of it. Like, boom, where this, like, you know, like you said, where the magazine sits, you know, and I mean,
and I actually had to think about it for a long. This is one of those things where you've done it so many times. I I mean, when's the last time you actively thought about how you brush your teeth?
Right.
Or, if you're in an office environment, you have to do a password all the time. If you have to rip off a password really quick, when was the last time you actually, especially if your IT department you have to have like 14 characters and it has to have a special numbers and letters and caps. Like, when is the last time you actually thought about entering each one individually, where sometimes you kind of get into it, like you can just rip it off and you don't even know. So same thing here. When you've done it enough times, I almost have to, I've spent several hours before this show, like, thinking, how do I do that?
You kind of forget what you know and how
100%.
You got there when you've done something a lot.
100%.
You're like, well, you just do it. It's like, oh, no, you don't just do it.
Right. And it's kind of, in some of my classes, I explain it kind of like your phone. So your phone has many apps. It can run many apps at one time. You can only actively interact with one at a time. All right, so you can only actively look at Instagram. And you can't look at Instagram and the weather and the GPS at the same time.
Yet.
It can be tracking you on GPS. It can be monitoring the weather and all that stuff, but like you can only interact with one thing at a time. Same thing with your conscious brain. You can only consciously be doing one thing at a time. And so even in shooting, actively reloading isn't something we want to think about. We're thinking about targets, whether that's some sort of defensive or offensive stimulus, or in the context of a game, we're thinking about the next target. So we don't want to actively be thinking about the reload. So the idea of practicing the reloads and honing the technique is it just happens. It's like, time to reload. I grabbed it and it happened. And so that just comes off of thousands and thousands of reps. It's essentially burned to the hard drive, and it just happens. But setting yourself up for success and then doing those reps, you do kind of have to actively do it and mess around with it for a while until it just kind of starts to happen naturally. But I guess what I was getting at before, when we break it down into the pieces, you can practice those pieces individually, because you might have problems getting it in the gun and getting it stuck in the gun, but that might be because you're grabbing the magazine crooked every time. You don't have a consistent grab. So you have to be consistent coming out of the magazine pouch. That is, one set of drills you could do. There's another drill. They call it the Burkett reload. It's named after Matt Burkett. But he would do the drill, and he would time it, or he'd set a par time and go just to the entry of the magazine well and stop. So he's just learning this piece. Wouldn't go all the way there. Just reps on this piece, and then you can add a seat, and then practicing the seat so that you get it all the way in there and it doesn't just fall out. That you actually got a seat all the way in there. So you can learn it in pieces too, because there are, while we kind of think of it as one thing, there's a few pieces that go into the magazine getting from point A to point B.
No, that makes a lot of sense, and I'm sure, like, as you learn those pieces, once you start putting the pieces together, even some further refinement happens after that. Yep.
Another cheat code on this is, a lot of times I don't actually practice dropping a magazine. So a lot of times I'll be practicing with an empty gun. I'm still pushing the button. So you're still doing the whole sequence, and you have to keep yourself honest that you're actually pushing the button. But if you're a busy individual, dropping the magazine on the ground and then having to bend over and pick up the magazine and reset the whole thing, that'll cut like the number of reps you can do by at least half, or if not more.
Okay.
So more time efficient to just practice the insert, pushing the button, which would be the simulated drop, and then the insert, and then resetting it again. But every once in a while, you do actually have to practice a live drop to make sure that you're pushing the button far enough that it comes out. And, it's not completely, it feels different when a magazine falls out of there too. But it saves you both. You can do more reps, and it's less wear and tear on the guns and the environment that you're in, because dropping them on the floor and stuff, it does wear and tear on stuff. So a lot of people don't actually drop magazines out when they're practicing the whole sequence. They're just practicing the motion of pushing the button and the insert. And then you gotta check every once in a while to make sure that you're doing the whole process correctly.
Cool, man. I dig it. It all makes sense. And the unfortunate thing, you mentioned the P word a lot of times, practice.
Mm-hmm. There's not really a cheat for that.
Shoot.
I know, right?
Come back next week when we have the cheat for practice.
Yeah. Up, down, left, right.
Oh my gosh, Adam, thank you, man. That's cool.
Thank you.
I can tell you've practiced a lot, and it shows. And I appreciate you sharing your insight, even though you had to almost relearn what you've learned, or not relearn. But
it's good to think about it sometimes, because you have to, it helps push. You kind of have a deeper understanding when you have to understand it to do it. And then you file it away, and then you have to kind of relearn it to explain it to somebody.
To articulate what's going on there. Yeah. No, cool. Awesome. Well, thank you, Adam.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. Some really cool information here. Get your pistols and practice.
And it's the same with a rifle, too.
Practice with that, too.
Yep.
Maybe we'll do that sometime.
If you shoot rifles and pistols, well, then that's 2 kinds of reloads you got to learn.
There you go. More to come. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Adam, thanks again. We'll catch you on the next one. Bye.
Bye.